Good evening, everybody. Welcome to tonight's edition of the Triangle Area SQL Server User Groups, Business Intelligence, Data Science, Artificial Intelligence, and a whole lot of other acronyms that we pack into one special interest group. So, with us tonight, we have the pleasure of bringing in Dr. Maryleen and Miracle Amaizu, who are going to talk to us all about building a data foundation for AI success. So, with that, I'd like to hand it off to the pair of you. So please take it away.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. So, we're going to get started. And yes, so today we are going to be talking about building robust data foundations for AI success. Sorry if it's quite late and I'm getting ready to go to bed soon. So, but yeah, we'll do our best. We'll do our best, and I'm sure as well. I'm joining from the UK with Miracle. So today we thought to share this because AI is a very, everybody's doing some form of AI, one form of AI or the other, and the data foundations is really very important because, like they say, without the strong foundation, a building cannot stand. And if AI is like that beautiful building, the data foundations is really important to keep it going. And yes, we're going to do a quick intro of who we are. So I am Maryleen. I'm a machine learning engineer at Redgate, working on AI technologies for data privacy. So I build AI software or integrate AI into existing legacy software and products to allow users to do more stuff like data privacy or privacy preserving AI related things. So one use case is test data manager tool, where we have users who need data, but then we need to make sure that that data is anonymized, and then I build some of the AI bits of it to anonymize the data, also work on synthetic data generation. I've been in this space for about 10 years, and my research, my PhD is in computer science. I focus on intelligence systems and privacy preserving AI. And I've also been involved in shaping Glowtail. Glowtail is a talent solutions company, and Frontier AI, which is a data training and AI consulting. So I'll hand over to Miracle to go through his profile as well.
Okay, thank you, Maryleen. Thank you, everyone. Miracle is my name, Amaizu. I'm a data coach at Glowtail. And at Glowtail, we are bridging gaps between talent and opportunities. So what I do at Glowtail is upskilling and reskilling individuals in tech. But our major is data and AI. So I'm also awaiting a PhD in environmental technology and management. My focus is using ML models to monitor particulate matter. And I'm also a co-founder at Glowtail and Frontier AI. So barriers to AI adoption. From McKinsey's reports, there are some barriers to AI adoption, and these are reasons why we have, failed AI projects because of these barriers. So they kind of relate to the need for us to have strong foundations for a successful AI project or successful AI projects. And some of them are already outlined, as we can see on the slide. Lack of clear strategy for AI, lack of technological infrastructure to support AI, lack of available data, limited usefulness of the data, and lack of changes to frontline processes. So, looking at the feedback loops. So, for our AI projects to succeed, There are data foundations it should have. Data should be secured, scalable, trustworthy, sustainable.
Yeah. And just to mention, we are happy to take questions as we move along. I know I can't see everyone on the audience, but yeah, we want to make it conversational style. So, Kevin, I would appreciate at some point if anyone has any question or comments to actually see what people are saying, and we'll just chat over that, and we'll be happy to get your thoughts as we move along as well. Okay, let's move forward.
So when we talk about the pillars for a successful AI project, which are data foundations, we can see data strategy as one of them, a clear vision for how our data empowers AI initiatives, very clear. So it depends on whatever the company is trying to build for their AI tool or for as an AI project for to support the business. So does he have a clear vision? And that's where data strategy comes in. Data governance also talks about the quality of the data, how secure it is, how compliant to build trust. Data preparation as well, from collection of the data to cleansing and preparing data for AI consumption, and also a robust architecture for growing volume and velocity. So we're talking about scalability and infrastructure, and lastly, feedback loops, continuously improving the models with relevant feedback. Gen AI is the number one type of AI solution deployed in organizations. Yes, because it reflects its rapid adoption and wide impact across industries. It's a quote from Gartner.
Yeah, and I think from the report they gave as well, you could see that a lot of organizations are speeding up to deploy some form of generative AI solution. I guess by this sheer ease of having access to these models, like you could just easily, let's say, access one of these endpoints, model endpoints, and foundation models are available. They're already pre-trained, so it's a quick win for them. You can easily deploy, very very easy, deploy a model, or actually, yes, point to an endpoint and use that model within your enterprise solution. So traditionally, like previously, yes, you'd have to go through the whole life cycle of collecting data, cleaning the data, transforming the data, and actually training the model from scratch. And you know that that model cannot scale. It's not flexible enough to be used in another environment, another use case. For example, if you had, let's say, a computer vision model that is just trained to detect objects, that's the only thing it could do. Whereas with generative AI, you can have one model is more like a jack of all trade. It can do multiple kinds of things. All you have to then think about is how do I adapt it to my specific use case, right? But yes, that is a blessing, but it can also be a challenge. I will talk more about why it could be a challenge. Yes, it's good that these models are accessible, but at the same time, is that making it easier for companies to get started with their generative AI? Yes, yes, it's making it easier for them to, like, at least reduce that barrier to entry. But is that making it scalable and easy to get return on investment on AI projects? Well, we're going to look at that because it's not just as easy as pointing to a model endpoint and using the foundation model. There's more to having a full scale AI solution that actually addresses and meets the required, or brings the required value to the organization and has the return of on investment. So these are some of the things we're going to explore.
Yeah. So looking at the use case for today's webinar, That's the case of I think it's a common AI use case, and companies use, a lot of companies are using this and this Gen AI customer support AI assistant. So there, the customer asks the question within the application or the system, and if you look at the diagram, we want to be able to retrieve some context and information from the enterprise database and feed that into the AI model and retrieve a response back to the user.
Yeah, and it's really common because we have, yeah, this workflow is what we tend to see. You have some form of course, like a query coming from a user,
Mm,
and where organizations are focusing on a lot, because yes, anyone, as long as you have open source models, you have the price models, and these models are out there accessible. But what becomes the differentiation is really that aspect where you're thinking about the context to feed into the LLM. So let's say customer would ask a question, and there are just some things that are proprietary. There's some things that are just enterprise based, your knowledge coming from your knowledge base, and it's not out there. It's not common knowledge. Even if it's somewhere out there, there are actually some knowledge that is specific to your organization, right? I'll give you an example. I was working on, so you had typically in some organizations here, you had organizations that bid for, let's say, projects, right? You have like these bid tenders, proposals, different names they are called. So usually you'd have maybe a bid team, because I was working closely with the pre-sales. We had the bid team. So whenever there was a proposal, they would sit on it, work on it. Sometimes they'll qualify the opportunity and prepare a proposal and respond to the questions, like the requirements. So put all the requirements together to submit that bid. Now, over time, let's say maybe 5 years, 10 years, the company is still doing that. It's still the same process of, there is this call for proposal, and they would still go through that whole process, the same amount of time they would spend. So now the challenge becomes, you have people that are in that big team, and they have several, I would say, levels of knowledge and expertise around bidding, right? So someone can have an experience from another organization, they come into the organization, they still have to understand how the organization goes about the whole process of submitting proposal and all. So now, what if somebody leaves the organization suddenly, right, with all that experience and knowledge? They've left the organization, right? But you still have some of that knowledge remaining in the company through previous bids they've written and all those documentation. But the challenge is that some of those documentation, when a new bid comes, nobody actually gets to find them, right? And then the team would have to start the process all over again, spend that much time going through the process. And that's where the value of generative AI, we looked at, okay, this is a very good use case of a back end or back office task that, yes, it's not directly customer facing, but yes, there's a big team behind the scene that's working on this. Could we use generative AI to actually enhance that workflow? And for us, ROI, we have to start thinking of what's going to be the return on investment, what would be the business case for change, right? Is it in terms of time, maybe saving the bid team the time they would have spent writing that bid, working on it, right? So the idea was that the generative AI solution would be about looking through the knowledge base, right? The enterprise databases where previous proposals have been written, bids and tenders and all within that, and they would be able, it would retrieve all that knowledge put that into some store. That's where you see vector stores. Just how do we bring all that knowledge into some store and a database and make it easily accessible to the large language model that is going to be responding. So each time there's a new proposal to work on, rather than start from scratch, it would actually retrieve that knowledge and augment that with any other response it's getting, so that yes, the response is grounded in some context within the organization. So the idea was, yes, this could save the bit in time. This could also, I mean, when people leave the organization, they live with a lot of knowledge, so we can find a way as well to use to actually get most of that knowledge and reuse that knowledge, right? And this is also a challenge, when people leave organizations, they leave with their expert knowledge and experience, and if that knowledge in some way could be captured and fed back as a context for responding to maybe a new hire rather than a new hire. I've worked in organizations where it took me, I mean, if I had some way to retrieve information, it would have made my life easier, right? But I would spend a long time. So my onboarding time was like maybe very long. You could spend 2, 3 months trying to adjust. Oh, where is this? Where is that? Where is this template? Where is that document? But people who have been working in the company know where these things are. But for me, that is new. It would take me more time to figure it out because yeah, I didn't know my ways around. So that could, so imagine this sort of solution. Yes, there's a customer support side, but there's also like maybe the for the employees, how it's going to make their work more efficient, how it's going to reduce the time to get into value, right? And there's so many aspects to it. But yes, it comes down to what is the organization trying to achieve and what is the return on investment, like what is the value. And sometimes the return on investment, yeah, it might be monetary, it might be cost saving, it might be efficiency, it might be so many other aspects, but these are all part of what needs to be thought through and put together, planned from the get-go. Okay.
Yeah. So the price enterprises pay for poor data foundation. Use case here is Air Canada. I think some of us might be familiar with this story. So Air Canada ordered to pay customer who was misled by airlines chatbots. So in this case, they were sued for misadvising customer through their AI chatbot. And the company claimed or argued that the AI is supposed to be responsible for its mistakes, and it was overruled by the court, and they were fined that the company should be responsible for what the technology says and does. Yeah, so it was a price they had to pay for poor data foundations.
Yeah. Yeah, and but like coming to our the use case we're talking about here, customer support, AI assistant. So this is just like a typical case of AI gone wrong, right? Because if you're bringing it out, then that's why I did some work in the public sector, I realized that there was like this phobia, I would say, for AI because of the whole ethical side of it. Like maybe the adoption was slower, and yeah, that is also coming from that, maybe that concern around ethics. Like, how do we make sure that we have control of what the AI is? Because if you have this sort of application and you want to make it more self-supervised and allow the AI, just give the AI leeway to advise, and you're not putting some form of, and that's where it brings us as well to going to talk about feedback loops. But yes, if you're not putting some form of, yeah, monitoring in place, feedback loops in place, this sort of thing would tend to happen as well. So there are lots of, if you investigate that, you might see that there are lots of things that it boils down to how, what, why was that misinformation happening? And this is where, yeah, organizations also need to really, really stamp their feet and start to take control, because you can't be too sure leaving all the controls to the AI if you don't have the right controls and foundations in place. Okay, so that brings us to, we're going to start exploring some of those data foundations, and we would focus on three of them: the data strategy, preparation, and the data governance. And we just talk through the other ones like data infrastructure or and scalability, and also the feedback loops. So data strategy, I like this statement that there is no AI strategy without a data strategy, right? Some organizations rush into, okay, we need to create an AI strategy. But then when you check, do you have a data strategy in place? They don't have a data strategy in place and they want to quickly rush into an AI strategy. So if you take it forward, no AI readiness without data readiness. Right? So, and that's in the this is the AI readiness framework of AI Singapore. And yeah, they did mention here about data readiness as well, right? So in their AI readiness framework, there is data readiness because yes, you have to recognize that you need your data to be ready, and you need to have that strong and robust data foundation for AI, for your AI to thrive. Yeah, you might get the AI started, you might have like proof of concept, or some proof of concept don't see the light of the day. Maybe they are not sustainable just because of issues around data readiness. And looking at it, I think one of the ways to start thinking about data strategy is to start considering where are we in our data maturity, right? So having that conversation, and it's not a one day conversation. Sometimes it's not even a conversation, that it takes a lot of stakeholders. So I remember working on some data strategy and AI strategy work, public sector, and it was, yeah, like there are several stakeholders involved in this conversation, right? Dialogue, looking at, sometimes it takes really looking at the data assets you have, casting the net widely and looking at the different opportunities. But yes, like really identifying where are we in our data maturity, right? From basic level to opportunistic to systemic, differentiating and transformational. And you can see that it gets more culture focused as you move up that level, right? At the very basic stage, it's more of let's have maybe go from where we have no single source of truth. Our data is not really exploited, right? We're just using it. Data is managed in silos, so you always have these concerns around, yeah, we just have spreadsheets everywhere, we have no source of truth, and yeah, things are just all over the place. People just make copies of data and just use data and just dump it somewhere. We don't actually even know where our data is. So you have this sort of concerns. And then at the opportunistic level, there's some attempt to formalize the requirements. But yes, culture is really important because, for example, if there's no leadership around the data, you have some organizational barriers. Yeah, it's not just going to be sustainable, right? And data would still maybe be in silos or just in some basic data platform. And when you start moving towards systemic, you have different content types being treated differently. Some form of agile starts to emerge, and yes, you still start seeing people that will become data and AI champions within the organization. And at the differentiating level, you actually see that yes, like there's a lot more going on. There is at that level, maybe is chief data officer, just like someone who is really taking up leadership and championing it at the, because that's also one reason, like one of the barriers to AI success. that comes out a lot is that yeah, there's no adoption at the C-suite level, right? Backing. There's no backing of senior leaders. Leaders don't even understand what's happening. So maybe you have a bunch of very enthusiastic data scientists with the data team just doing their thing, running some experiments on Jupyter notebooks, and when the experiment is done, everyone is excited, and that's just where it all ends, right? But at this point, yeah, there is actually a champion and clearly defined processes for data. There's also a link to outcome and data. There's a link to the ROI. It's very, very clear. Then at the transformational level, you see that, I mean, some things like very, very, the business is now very strategic and aligned. So that these are the levels, right? But like we said, that to actually understand where the organization is in that data maturity level, it takes several conversations, maybe some design workshops, some looking introspecting and asking specific question and identifying what actually are the pillars that make up this data maturity and going all the way. And this is all maybe, and this is just an example. For instance, you have some of the pillars, and from asking those questions, looking at really in depth, going through each of those pillars, you can then see a particular pattern emerging, and it's going to be from this is where we are right now to this is where we want to be, right? So this is where we are. Maybe we're at level one now. We want to get to level two, right? Except you're leapfrogging, going from level one to level five is like very, very ambitious. But yes, like typically you go from a level and then you look at where do we want to get to? And you then begin to identify the recommendations, the roadmap for you to go from the current level to the target level. So that is, yeah, it's rigorous. Like I remember when I walked through this exercise with an organization, and in the public sector, we had to identify who are the key decision makers who are going to be involved in some design workshops. And it was really collaborative, and it was a joint effort to actually get to the point where yes, we can walk through and put together a comprehensive data strategy for the organization. And remember, the key stakeholders be on that table to make that work. And then, as part of that, data strategy is also to identify, because usually an organization wants to know, okay, what do we? I know maybe we might want to do 20 things, right? There are 20 things like out there that we can do, but how do we prioritize them? So this is where opportunity mapping and prioritization comes in. So how do we identify the opportunities that we actually want to? Yes, we might need to maybe start with the quick wins, but get some value and then incrementally start working towards more more sophisticated aspects that might require more investment, more buying, or like maybe with the way it's all boiled down to the culture. If like the executive team want to see, actually we can see these quick wins and we can invest more in the AI solutions, right, in the long term. But yeah, but having like a very optimistic goal at the start, complex projects that probably take 3 years to come to value. It's usually these are some of the things that when you look back, you'd see that the budget has been pulled out from that project because they just can't see the value. So these are some of the conversations. Now coming to data governance, like it said here, data governance is often seen as a bureaucratic hurdle, but without strong governance, AI data management will collapse under its own complexity, because AI it can be very complex. Yes, we have the fancy models out there, but if you think about the entire AI life cycle, it's touching on so many aspects of the business. It's touching on data assets, it's touching on technological infrastructure. It's touching on the skills, the people themselves, those who are going to be skilled to do the work, monitor the work, take accountability. It's touching on ethics as well, right? Like you have regulations out there. So even the legal persons, I remember like when we work on some projects, and I'll be surprised the way legal actually just takes up the whole case. And even those of us that are technical, like, okay, we are handicapped until the legal people can approve that we should move forward, right? The finance people are going to come in and like, okay, this how do we justify this cost? And also it's really a whole lot. And that's why, yes, governance is really, really important. And we have here that 70% of high performing organizations reported difficulties related to data governance. And that's coming from number of factors. So data governance can be challenging because you have so many different aspects you're looking at, how areas of responsibility, you're looking at the quality of the data, making sure that the data, you're accountable for every data that is coming in, how it's coming in, and there's so many aspects of it, and that's why it can be challenging. But yeah, it's really worth it. It's really worth it to lay a strong foundation. So coming back to our example here, because we're going to use that to really draw on some points around data governance. So we mentioned here that we have a use case with a user, customer support AI assistant, and they'll have to send queries, right? And they would also have to wait for a response. So between them sending a query and getting a response back, there are so many things that are happening behind the scene. And yet we mentioned things like prompt and context management happening because that user's query has to be processed. First of all, if, for example, let's say a user asked a question that's the customer asked the question, let me use an example. What is the CEO's salary? And that is not a question they should answer, right? Imagine that this is just a customer support AI assistant that is just responding to customer's query. And then the customer is asking, what is the CEO's salary? And imagine that you don't have the right governance in place on how that query goes into the system and comes back. And then it just comes back with the CEO salary. That means they can find out everything. They can even find out all the trade secret because they can have access to like all the proprietary information, sensitive information that's within the organization, right? And that is where, so behind the scene, there are things that need to happen, right? For example, you need to be able to create a catalog, right? You need to be able to create and update a data catalog. You need to be able to implement some data privacy policies that would guide how that user, because whatever is coming into your system from a user is data, right? And if you don't have data policy, privacy policy in place, there is nothing guiding how that data that's coming in is going to be processed, nothing guiding how it's going to be utilized and all that. So data privacy policies have to be put in place. Then you need to also implement data quality by, for example, the data type and the source. So how are you going to maintain and ensure the quality of the data? And one other thing that would be important, depending on, so let's say users can upload video and they all and text, right? Multimodal data. You would have to be able to link your structured and unstructured data sets, right? And you should also be able to implement some fine grade access control, both for the structured and unstructured data sets. Because between the user sending a query, there's some processing of that query, right? Step 2 here, process the query. So if that query had some sensitive information like jailbreaking, maybe somebody asking, ignore every other prompt that is on the system and do this. Someone asking for something outside the remit of what the system should be doing. you now have to put some guardrails in place, right? You have to probably look at if information comes back and it has some PII, maybe personally identifiable information. Part of your governance would be on how to redact that PII, right? And you could also perform some custom classification to really know. Sometimes there's a user query, you would need to know where to route it based on some custom classification that has been set in place. So these are all part of what would be happening behind the scene around the governance. So it's not just, this is just one use case, right? And there's so many other AI use cases. You'd always have to think of what is coming in as data and how that will pass through your system. And if you're retrieving any information, how information will be retrieved and sent back to a user. That's all part of what you would address within your data governance. So then let's look at data preparation, and it's here. I'm going to show you, a demo, at least like some visualization, so you can see what is happening under the hood. But yeah, for data preparation, for us to get full advantage from AI, like I said here, you need to make your data AI ready. So there is this whole, I would say, area around data driven or data centric AI, where we're saying that when it comes to, let's say you wanted to compete with another organization, right? If you want to compete on algorithms, you'll be looking at maybe, do you want to actually create those algorithms from scratch? Probably not, right? Because there are already lots of researchers that have been, working hard day and night building algorithms. So we probably would go to some of those research papers and retrieve those algorithms and try to implement existing algorithms, right? So if you actually wanted to maybe outshine your competitor based on algorithm, it's going to be difficult because yeah, the algorithms, everyone is using them. Just use the foundation models as an example, right? So you wouldn't probably, except that is your business, maybe your business line is around building models. But you can even see how competitive the space has become. OpenAI launches one today, then Google will come with theirs. Anthropo, all the different companies are competing like on the leaderboard. So it's not even easy for them to outshine one another. And let's say your business is not focusing on building foundation models or your own LLM. So what is going to be your competitive advantage? Obviously not creating the LLMs, right? Because the LLMs are there for you to use. Well, if you want to create one, that's also good and fine. But what is going to make you outshine or stand out from your competitor, become innovative, right? Is going to be your data eventually, right? Given that the model is the same, all things being equal, the model is a constant.
Hmm.
It's going to be your data. And that's where data centric AI is actually coming into play, saying that the more ready your data is, the more ready and sustainable your AI also is going to be in the long run, because you're going to win in the now with the proof of concept, but you're also going to win in the future, make it sustainable by being able to have your AI, because AI is not a one-off, is not a hit and run, right? You deploy that model or you have your AI in production, but there's going to be that constant life cycle. Is an asset, right? An asset needs to be maintained. An asset needs to be, you need to be able to really maintain an asset, and that's what it's going to be. So there are some challenges with data preparation. We have challenges of volume and velocity. So you hear organizations say things like, we struggle to validate and transform data in real time as it flows in from different sources. Data is flowing from different sources. How do we make sure we validate that data and transform it? So that real time challenge, because we're moving away from just having the batch, having data stored and then reused. So value is coming with time, right? So the more time you're wasting, the less valuable that data would be in some cases. Then multimodal in integration, where you have For example, you need to integrate text, images, audio, structured data all at once, and it's becoming hard to keep your data consistent across those different modes of data and structures. And then you have the case of labeling and context, right? So, for example, we have a lot of data, but they are lacking proper labels and even contextual metadata to give us accurate AI outputs. And this is a typical pipeline, data pipeline for generative AI, still on our customer support, AI support assistant. So you have this whole pipeline is around, the different stages the data has to pass through before it gets back to the user, right? And then how you implement all of this really boils down to there's so many techniques out there. And this is like a whole, like retrieval augmented generation is a whole field altogether because the new techniques that keep coming. But everything boils down to you how within your organization you want to implement that and what you see working for the organization. And then some of these you'd have to experiment with different approaches and see what works best for your kind of data, right? But then you can go from having to ingest that data to processing that data. So some cleaning, chunking. So let's say you had a PDF files, and that's the example I would show is also about you have PDF files that contain some information. They could even contain some tables, right? And you can just feed. Now that data is within your enterprise database. You wouldn't feed it just as context as it is directly to the large language model. There's some preparation of that data that needs to happen within your data pipeline to be able to get it ready, prepared as a context. Remember the context. Now, the user has asked a question. Yeah, they've asked a question, they're interacting with your chatbot or your interface. But then this is something that needs to happen behind the scene. And it does not mean that you need to do that each time there's a query. You can already have that data prepared, all your proprietary data prepared and put into some form of storage, like a vector storage, so that when there's a query, the focus will be on how to retrieve that already stored context and you feed that to the large language model and use that to respond to the user. So you see that between data ingestion, data processing, and storage, these can all happen, you know, asynchronously. Maybe you can have, depending on how new data comes in, you can actually have in a pipeline that might update it, let's say on a regular basis. You could say weekly, depending on the frequency of new data coming in. The idea is that all that data that is within your enterprise database is is processed, clean, and it's stored, ready for retrieval, right? And when there is retrieval, so you'd have to also be able to retrieve the data, feed the context to the large language model, and then feed the response to the user. But within that is all your feedback and monitoring going on. For example, feedback, it all happens to us when maybe you're using ChatGPT. It tells you, do you like this response, response one or response two? And you can choose a response. And that is a way it gets feedback as well. So you can design your own feedback mechanism. But before you even get this solution all implemented, there are metrics you'd be looking at to compare whether your data pipeline it actually works as you expect it to. And if it doesn't work as you expect it, then you would likely look for a better solution. So the way I imagine this is you have one pipeline, that just uses raw data as a baseline, and then another pipeline that uses processed data. So you'd be expecting that your metrics would for the processed data would be better, right? And if it's not much better than the raw data, you would have to find that. So you should maybe think of a baseline to work with so that you can compare your new workflow with that baseline. And I'm going to show you, for example, like this pipeline would what happens when I run it, and I'm working on putting everything together so that I'll be able to share it maybe later on GitHub so you can see the pipeline. Yeah, but the pipeline just goes through these whole steps of ingesting the data, doing some processing on it, storing it, and indexing, and also doing some retrieval, right? And I compare that with the raw data when it hasn't passed through any processing. And there's several metrics as well that I check for that, but just on what the data looks like. So you have, for example, I'm just using a very simple use case of you have some documents that is a PDF file and it has a bunch of tables in it, right? And usually you're going to build out, let's say, this is going to be maybe a user's input. So I would, for test purposes, I have a bunch of questions, answers, right? Like query, user query, and the expected. So this is a reference, my reference answers. So typically, like if you're building out, evaluation is very, very important, of course, for if you got data foundation, bringing us to feedback loops, right? You need to be able to have a mechanism to evaluate your your system and check how the quality of the data and make sure that yes, you have the right mechanism in place. Because if you can't say you have a strong or robust data foundation when you don't have the metrics in place to measure that. So, for example, a typical example, I work in privacy, and when organizations, for example, say, I want to share my test data, I want to anonymize my data or create synthetic data and share it so that people cannot retrieve the personally identifiable information or the production data, I usually check how are you measuring that your data is compliant? What do you have in your workflow to measure that this data I'm now sharing is compliant, at least to the requirements of your whatever or audits and whatever governance you have in place. There must be like some proof or some way to say, okay, this data is satisfactory, not just someone saying, okay, I've created you some synthetic data with AI and you can now use it. And you go, okay, now I can use it. No, you need to have some ways to check. So these are some of the things you build into your data pipeline to ensure that robust foundation, data foundation, your evaluation, your feedback loops. So this, for example, you have a bunch of questions and you have a reference, and this is like the response you're getting from the large language model, and you're going to be checking some metrics. So I'm checking a few metrics here. So some of these metrics you check, you can actually use an AI model. Interestingly, like we're talking about data foundations for AI, but AI is also helping us in creating data foundations by like this is like LLM as a judge, where the LLM is acting as an evaluator as well. But there are also some non-LLM metrics that you can use to evaluate. So these are some scores in place, and you can begin to like plot that and check against this is my raw workflow and this is my process pipeline. So am I getting better performance with my process pipeline versus the raw data pipeline? So that's my approach, typical approach. But there are several other things as well you could do within that. So let's push ahead because of our time. Okay, so pretty much this is what, I don't know if there are any questions coming in, but this is what we have to cover. So let's just quickly recap. Yeah, we've been talking about data foundations, and that we need um, strong data foundations for AI. Like we said, one is your data strategy. You also need to have strong data governance in place. Prepare your data, and we had scalability and infrastructure. Well, yes, all that boils down to there are challenges with infrastructure. Challenges like, as a typical example of the one I faced recently was moving from one cloud provider to another, right? Or thinking about how do I integrate this into my existing, I already have existing infrastructure. How do I integrate this new model, this new AI solution, this new data solution into my existing infrastructure? So integration issues as well come up, and then feedback, right? So, like I said, you can't talk about building a data foundation without having some form of mechanism to get feedback, even when it comes to data drift, right? Because your data could drift from what you initially had, and then just drift, or your concepts can drift, your context. In the era of generative AI, you can have your context also drifting. So, given all of that, you need to also have appropriate feedback loops. And yeah, happy to take any questions. Miracle, do you have anything more?
Yeah, I think we can wait for questions. Kelvin, is there any
So I'm
question?
checking in chat right now. There are no questions at the moment. Although, if anybody does have questions, now is a perfect opportunity to get them in.
All right.
But yeah, it looks like at the moment, I think it's no questions. Things are going pretty well.
All right. Yeah, so is that a wrap for today then? Oh, I believe it's a yes for anybody having maybe some sort of doubts, or a clarity to go ahead to go ahead to building that AI project. So,
Yeah.
yeah, some form of clarity.
Yeah, looks like no questions coming out of chat. So I think we're good to continue.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, that's everything we wanted to cover. Meaning, in just to recap, yeah, AI is growing at unprecedented speed, and I mean the level at which new models, new techniques and approaches, I mean, just in this space of large language models and retrieval augmented generation, like everything you see here as like a data preparation pipeline, each of them is like so many techniques like coming out every day around it, right? So it's like you can't even exhaust if you talk about the ingestion approaches or data processing or storage or indexing or retrieval, right? So many techniques, but good thing is that if you think about, yeah, before you actually just rush into, let's just build this AI out, even as a simple feature. So I have one that's, been working on of recent, and just it's just like a feature, maybe call it a tiny feature. Funny enough, like we've been building a solution for a very long time, right? But then we just it was just a way to leverage a large language model to solve one, just add a feature to a privacy solution that we already had, a privacy software we already had. And the massive uptake, the feedback was so. encouraging. I'm like, whoa, we've been working on traditional machine learning models, building something out, and then we just leveraging large language model to add a tiny feature to an existing solution, and it brings so much value. So that sometimes as well, it's about thinking about, yeah, what's the return on investment in terms of what value does this add to the, it might be an existing, you don't always have to think of it has to be off the shelf. And I see organizations starting to, okay, we're going to build our own language model. It's fine if that is, you know, part of like maybe a strategic decision to make, right? But to do it for the sake of it, organization saying, you know what, if there's no AI in it, I'm not going to buy just because we have an AI budget and we want to become an AI company. It- And all of that points to the fact that some organizations are not thinking about like this is the big picture of this solution. That's why when they then rush into an AI solution down the line, there's a lot of disappointment for them and shocker because no, this is not what we expected. We expected the value to go off the roof. For us, the foundational things have not been put in place, have not been put together. And that's why that project
Field.
isn't sustainable at the end of the day. Right. So let me use an example. If like the case of what we are looking at, a customer support AI assistant, and you deploy that, everyone is happy, but then you start retrieving information that leaves your company less secure. No matter the ROI you're getting from that solution, the fact that it's leaving your organization unsecure, is leaking your private data, it just makes already it's already tilting towards failure, right? Because you would need to probably park that solution and try to fix the problem. And in fixing the problem, you might find that actually, because you've not put the right foundation in place, you have to go round and around the circle. And this is where organizations get frustrated and eventually think of, okay, you know what, let's just park this for now. Let's just not move forward with this for now, right? So starting from the top to water a plant without going down the roots. All right, that's it. That's everything from us.
Oh, excellent. And there was a comment in chat following along with what you were saying that just because they have money to throw at it doesn't mean that it's smart money or a good idea. And so I think that sums up a little bit right there. So thank you again. Do you have a closing slide with contact info if folks would like to reach out to you?
Yeah, so it actually at the start we had our, and go back, linked our LinkedIn. So if you can see our LinkedIn. So that's my LinkedIn, simple as just Maryleen, and then that's Miracle's LinkedIn. So you can connect with us.
All
And
right.
like, yeah, like I said, maybe for the demo, I'm trying to like just get everything finished up and tidied. So I would send the link to the demo. Maybe if anyone wants to have a play, yeah, everything's just going to be there either as Jupyter notebook for you to actually see how it runs, or just the entire pipeline that I ran that shows you the raw data sets and then the process data sets, so you can appreciate what it looks like when you in both scenarios. And yeah, how that the point hypothesis there is that yes, you have to, like, that's my approach, have a baseline and then have some metrics to check whether your processing pipeline actually does better than the baseline, and then I treat from there.
All right, very good. So if anybody is interested in that, please do reach out, follow up afterwards, and be able to get a copy. So in the meantime, thank you again so much. I know it's now getting up to midnight your time, so we certainly
Yeah.
appreciate you staying up pretty late for us. Great presentation, and thank you again.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, everyone.
Of course,
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks,
and
everyone.
for everybody in chat, until we do see each other at a future TriPass meeting, take care.
Bye.
Bye.